Tens of thousands of New Yorkers and New Englanders filtered into Michigan via the Erie Canal. Mason himself used the Erie Canal eagerly when he had to go to and from Washington to see President Jackson. We're talking about Mason is Governor Mason, the governor of Michigan. Boy governor, I think elected at the age of 19. Almost everyone in Michigan gushed with praise for this new canal, which brought them immigrants and took their exports. The message seemed obvious. States that wanted to get ahead needed active governments to tax their citizens and build transportation network. Why couldn't private economy build it? They hadn't done it yet. No one had done it yet. To compete with New York, for example, Pennsylvania spent $14.6 million on its mainline canal from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. Maryland and Massachusetts joined in the rush with a variety of state-supported projects. Illinois and Indiana began elaborate canal works in 1837, just when Michigan entered the Union. Railroads were being built too, and some states began to lay track and buy locomotives. So canals proved all the rage, but here comes railroads. To Governor Mason, this was all exhilarating. Maybe the traditional theory of limited government was wrong. This happens, like every generation has to learn this anew. Maybe states could be creators, or at least in the area of transportation. So the state was recognized that the state creates nothing. Everybody knew that's common knowledge. But the Erie Canal seemed to disprove that theory, didn't it? Maybe states could be creators, at least in the area of transportation, and after all, it was states, not the federal government, which were building these canals. So maybe that's the principle, as long as the federal government's not involved in it. Well, what if you saw the federal highway system today? That distinction might have satisfied great-granduncle George Mason, the fact that the state's doing it, not the government. Even as territorial governor, Mason urged Michigan to lay the foundation for the state to build internal improvements. When delegates met in 1835 to write the Michigan Constitution, because it had been a territory and it's becoming a state, they, with Mason's encouragement, wrote the following into law. Get this passage right here. Internal improvements shall be encouraged by the government of this state. Wow. And it shall be the duty of the legislature, as soon as may be, to make provisions by law for ascertaining the proper objects of improvement in relation to roads, canals, and navigable waters. So they simply wrote into the state constitution a virtual monopoly on improvements in transportation and infrastructure. In other words, continuing the quote, Michigan's constitution almost required the state to fund internal improvements. Now, get the book and read it. It's a very good book. I'll just allow you to guess what happened. What do you think happened when the state of Michigan got heavily involved in transportation? The state of Michigan, which we know today is a bastion of industry and creativity and entrepreneurship. Well, skipping down a few pages, we're page 51. Thomas Cooley, C-O-O-L-E-Y, Michigan's most prominent lawyer in the 1800s, observed firsthand the way the state ran its railroads. He wrote about it later in A History of Michigan. Quote, doubts were arising in the minds of the people whether the state had been wise in undertaking the construction and management of internal improvements. These doubts soon matured into a settled conviction that the management of railroads was in its nature essentially a private business and ought to be in the hands of individuals. By common consent, it came to be considered that the state, in entering upon these works, had made a serious mistake. So the intervening 9 pages is quite a good story about the details of the catastrophe that unfolded from that little paragraph in their Constitution. By 1846, Governor Alpheus Fitch, who followed Governor Barry, carried the day for privatization. Quote, the business of transporting passengers and freight by railroad is clearly not within the ordinary design of state government, Felch observed. The legislature finally agreed and voted to sell the state's public works in 1846. Short-lived experiment. And they tried it again in other countries decades later. They said, let's try it. Okay, skipping down a bit, continuing a different quote. They moved quickly to write this discovery into law. The next year, in 1850, Michigan held a state constitutional convention. The proper role of government in society was one of the issues. The 1835 Constitution, which mandated government support for internal improvements, was changed. In its place was the following, quote, "The state shall not subscribe to or be interested in the stock of any company, association, or corporation." Right? The state shall not be interested, shall not ascribe to, shall not purchase, shall not be involved in the stock of any company, association, or corporation. End quote. Furthermore, a little further down, the state shall not be party to or interested in any work of internal improvement, nor engaged in carrying on any such work, except for the donation of land. So all the state can do for improvements is give land. It can't do anything else. It can't be involved in the companies that do it. It can't do anything. Can't do anything but give away land. They wrote that into the Constitution. So it's one thing to just say the people are free, and then you can fight in court whenever the government tries to come and do projects or whatever. But they didn't just have in their Constitution the people are free and the government runs the place. They had in their Constitution the people are free and the government cannot do this at all. They set it down and parsed, very closely parsed, the state shall not subscribe to or be interested in the stock of any company, association, or corporation. That is the root of, that went into effect in 1850. So that is the root of the productivity of Michigan, of Chicago, the city of big shoulders. I know Chicago's in Illinois, but it's all the metropolis of Michigan's productivity. So, okay, next subject. So we've gone from medieval times and pre-America, the ubiquity of state controls. Then we see in America the birth of state controls, some lessons from it, doing away with those state controls. Now let's look at the Civil War just a bit. And then after that, recessions generally. So, for the Civil War next. From The Americans, The National Experience by Daniel J. Boorstin, B-O-O-R-S-T-I-N. We are going now to page 175.